You ever just die? I, like many others, spend my time playing the video games. It's what my entire channel is based off on, if you couldn't tell. You know, this would look a lot better if I had more videos to scroll down on. However, unlike me, you probably have a life and simply don't have the time to go through the harsh challenges you go through as you're playing. Those harsh challenges annoyingly stopping you from progressing when all you want to do is have fun. Or you're exactly like me, and you just aren't good at games no matter how much you tell yourself, so you reluctantly lower the difficulty, feeling nothing but shame for everything you stand for because you spent the past 2 hours fighting one boss and all you got was death. Death, 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 death. A reward without challenge is no reward at all. A reward with great challenge is nigh unobtainable. I just made that up. 2021. From the beginning of time, aka the 70s, games were naturally difficult because they needed a way to vacuum your child's allowance when they visit the arcade. But if we were to look at it from a game design point of view instead of EA's, then things get pretty interesting. Between the 70s and 90s, games were very short. The average person could complete most of these here in about 2 hours, which by today's standards doesn't typically cut it out for a AAA game. There were also a ton of endless games where the objective was to achieve a high score, but the fact remains that they also get harder and harder until you lose. However, back then it was a lot harder to finish these games in 2 hours because while they were naturally more difficult than the average game today, hardware limitations at the time also took part in the length. Arcades were in one place and were enjoyed by everyone. If you lost, you most likely wouldn't have been able to try again unless you had the time and some spare change from the allowance your mother and I gave you. Most early games in the home console era didn't include a save feature either, meaning you would have to start over from the beginning every time you turned your console off. Though some did feature a neat workaround for those who do progress far, like codes to input in the main menu so you can jump to a level, or a shortcut more experienced players can enter if they manage to find it. In a way, getting shortcuts was a reward for those who earned it, and if you could get past Marble Zone, then I think you get that right, because I'm gonna be real, I have no clue what happens in Sonic 1 after that. And nowadays, playing games is just a normal thing, and being a quote-unquote gamer isn't as grotesque, for lack of a better word, as it was back then. But the gaming market has widely expanded since then because more and more games were becoming appealing to a more casual audience in one way or another. I think one of the main kickstarters for this move, aside from mobile gaming and the overall expansion of the casual market, but that's another topic for another time, is the inclusion of difficulty modes. Just like how your mum is accessible to everyone she meets, difficulty modes make games accessible for everyone with a variety of skill levels. It doesn't matter if you're good or bad at the game as long as your experience is enjoyable after all. And the addition of difficulty modes makes it so that more people are able to enjoy their experiences because they aren't tied to one difficulty. See, if you think about it like life, over time a game has to naturally get more challenging as you progress because of things like extra responsibilities, crippling debts, depression. You know, for fun. For most games you typically don't want to increase the difficulty too slowly or too quickly, but just enough so that the player is always in what's called the flow zone. Silly name? Yes. This is an actual thing you learn in game design, and I'm in crushing student debt because of it. So, give me money. The flow graph takes the player's skill and the difficulty of the game into account. As you play, you are constantly improving, learning enemy patterns or how the in-game physics work, so you're able to take advantage of that. And as a result, the game gets easier. But because the game gets easier, players are more likely to become bored of the challenge, hence this boredom space. A simple solution would be to just give them a more challenging experience. But you also have to balance this too, because if the game suddenly gets too challenging, they'll be in the anxiety space and will start to get discouraged by playing your game as there's no sense of progression for them. If the game starts to get boring, why not add some challenge to it? Add in new enemies with different behaviors, maybe some stronger attacks. Set harder objectives like crunching them under a time limit. Create a mission where you make cereal but have the first step be pouring milk. I don't know, it's your game, do whatever you want. If the game is too difficult, you could present a more easier or less intensive gameplay. You have no idea how many hours of footage I have of me just planting crops in my farm in Nier replicant version 1.2247. The problem with this flow graph, however, is that it's sort of one note on its own, meaning a player with a particularly higher skill set than average will mainly spend the time out of the flow zone, and it's the same with those with lower skill sets. That's where difficulty modes come in. Each mode has its own flow graph tailored to different players of a variety of skill sets, meaning that those with a particularly lower skill set can still make it through the game and stay in the flow zone, as there is less room for them to be in that anxiety space. And it's the same for those with a higher skill set, but there is now less room for boredom. And for some reason, a surprising number of people think that multiple difficulty modes, or more specifically an easy mode, is a bad thing. The debate of easy mode inclusivity stems from the discourse between hardcore players and casual players. If you're wondering why that sounds so formal, I literally ripped it straight from one of my old essays. Adding an easy mode will allow casual players to experience more of your initially difficult game, as there's no longer a large skill gap between them and the game. However, this in turn alienates your hardcore players as they thrive off challenge, and they argue that adding an easy mode for a game that's meant to be challenging diminishes the rewarding feeling you get when you overcome an obstacle. Personally, while I'm in favour of adding more difficulty options because they allow more people to experience a game they normally wouldn't be able to get into, I do think this is down to the developers' intentions. After all, games are a product, and these products are catered towards their specific audiences. Casual players, hardcore players, and everything in between all have different tastes, and what may be appealing to one side may not always be appealing to the other. That's why in some cases it's okay to direct your attention to one of them. And if you want to cater to a general audience or a fandom that houses people with a variety of skill levels, then having multiple difficulties can go a long way. Resident Evil 4, I didn't have a good segue for this, is infamous for its dynamic difficulty feature. What RE4 does is record how the player is doing while they play, and if it looks like they're progressing smoothly with no hiccups, enemies will suddenly become more aggressive and will deal out more damage. Likewise, if you're doing poorly, enemies don't do that. In fact, enemies just outright don't spawn at all. Game Maker's Toolkit has a nice video on this, you should check it out. It delves deep into the game design of Resident Evil 4 and it's pretty interesting. But what Resident Evil 4 is essentially doing is correcting the difficulty without you knowing, so that you're always in the flow zone. It knocks you down when you're doing really well and picks you up when you're doing terrible. And the fact that this is all in the background makes it so that the player isn't aware that the game is helping them, and as a result, the rewarding feeling of completing a section is still there. Everything I talked about so far seems to ignore those who are part of a specific audience that I haven't mentioned. Veteran players. They're different from the hardcore category because these types of players know the game inside out, and as a result they need to challenge themselves further in order to make the game fun or rewarding, to the point where they just want something new. Speedrunners can typically fall into this category, but you can too. After all, there's a number of challenges the community has made to make an old game seem fresh and exciting. Things like the Pokemon Nuzlocke challenge, where if your Pokemon faints, you can never use it again. You're also limited to catching and using the first Pokemon you see in an area. There's also that challenge I mentioned in my previous video, where you don't use a time skip feature in games that feature one. I implore you to watch it, as well as my other videos, and if you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe. I have to remind you that I don't do this shit for free. You ever play Dark Souls on a DDR mat? Or bongos? Or bananas? To put it in other words, games deserve to be played and experienced by everyone. I like to choose hard difficulties in the games I play personally, but there are times where I just want to enjoy the story, or to just have a complete power trip, and playing on an easy difficulty is perfectly fine. The quality of the game is not tied down to its difficulty, but how fun it is, and I do not care one bit if you decide to play Minecraft in peaceful mode. Unless I play with you, because then I will make fun of you, but I like the survival. I like surviving. At the end of the day, if a 5-year-old can complete Bloodborne on his own, then maybe we don't actually need an easy mode, and you just need to suck it up and get good, you filthy casual fuck.